Well, folks, here we are for the weekly forecast. Before we get to the main forecast, let's look at how we blew this storm from last week. The upper air low was expected to move through last week and produce a widespread area of precipitation across the state in the order of around an inch. We did see some locations that met that criteria. Basically, we had some heavy snowfall fall from the western Sandhills southwestward toward the Imperial region, but in advance of that snow in that region, we had a dry slot develop across west central into portions of central Nebraska. And then as that upper air low moved eastward, we did see some thunderstorms developing in the south central through central Nebraska region. And then as that system entirely moved through the state, stalled over central Iowa, and we've seen a long-lived snow event across portions of eastern Nebraska and portions of central and east central into southeastern Nebraska, anywhere from about 3 inches central to upwards of 8-9 inches across extreme eastern Nebraska. So it was very welcome moisture, but unfortunately some areas did miss out on the precipitation. Now there's several more chances of moisture as we go forward, as we're in a very active pattern. So let's hope that the models will be a little bit more correct in terms of their predicted output from this moisture. And let's go to the upper air models to see how this is going to play out. And the first thing I'll draw your attention to is the snowstorm that hit the northern plains through the southeast is starting to push some of the colder air toward our south, so we are going to see much cooler conditions than we have the past few days, where we were well across the 60s across much of the state. But as the system moves eastward, we may see some precipitation break out across the panhandle. It looks to be very light. It may increase in intensity as we get into the overnight hours, and there is some signs that we may see some accumulating snowfall across the northern panhandle, possibly into the southern panhandle, but right now it only looks to be in the 1 to 2 inch range. Now as we go into tomorrow, we'll start to see a system much stronger diving into the central Rockies, and then that's going to rapidly move eastward. So we're going to start to see precipitation break out from west to east, and it'll increase in intensity as the day progresses. Not a big precipitation maker, but we may see a 1/4 to a 1/2 inch in some locations. And as the system moves through during the overnight hours, we could see some snow accumulations once again across the northern half of the state, but again it's looking like it's going to be in the 1 to 2 inch range. By the time we get to Monday, this system's going to really start to energize itself as it moves eastward. Going to pull in some pretty cold air behind it. So there might be a brief shot of snow across the east, but it doesn't look like anything significant, and it'll probably be out of the region by the time we get to the midday on Monday. As we get into Tuesday, we'll start to see the ridge trying to rebuild back in, bringing warmer weather to the southwestern part of the state, much cooler conditions as it's closer to the core of this very cool conditions moving into the eastern Corn Belt. So we'll be looking at highs in the mid-30s. As we go to Wednesday, it looks like everybody should be sunny, but we'll pay attention to this storm system that's going to rapidly drop into the central Rockies and represent our next significant chance of moisture. And as we get into Thursday, we'll see the system drop down. We'll start to see moisture in advance of this system, so we could see some fairly widespread light precipitation across the state, with more intense precipitation probably starting to break out as we get into Friday, bringing very cold conditions in. We could see the potential for some significant snow accumulations with this system. This is one to pay attention to, and as the system moves eastward, is expected to stall out, so giving us an extended period of off and on precipitation that may last 4 or 5 days. Now let's take a look at the temperature forecast. Warmest temperatures will be this weekend, and then we'll see a cooling trend as that frontal system moves to the east of us. And as we get into later next week, we'll start to see the temperatures increase in advance of that system. But notice as we get into Friday, cooler conditions start to develop in the northwest with a chance of snowfall, and that may spread across much of the state as we get into next weekend. Let's look at the forecast for 8 to 14 day forecast next Thursday through the following Tuesday. Very cold conditions in terms of precipitation. Looks to be above normal for a vast majority of the state.